Hi, guys, welcome back to another episode in the Beyond Ordinary series. My name is Shelly Hamilton. If you're new here, welcome. If you are not so new here, welcome back. So, today we're talking about GLP-1s. As you know, it's my journey on Mounjaro, and I'm just wanting to give you what's happening in the space, what's happening with me on my journey, all the updates that I have to share with this new treatment, and where the treatment is evolutionizing, the direction it's going, and how we, as part of the community, can benefit from the changes that are taking place. And today is no different, guys. Today, I'm actually going to be talking about to compound or not to compound, branded or compounded GLP-1s. No, I would have shared in my previous videos that I have all intentions of going the route of compounding. And my reasons for compounding on a GLP-1 is, of course, varied. It's as a result of cost. It's as a result of my wanting to look at the longevity of being on a GLP-1. It's also about not necessarily resource in terms of money, but resource in terms of availability and access. Because for me, while it is not particularly difficult to access my Mounjaro, as I'm currently accessing my Mounjaro, if at any point in time that I want to titrate, which is going up a dose, and by now I think we are all aware that I am on Mounjaro 5 milligram titrated up from a 2.5. So because of where I am at now, and potentially any stalls that I'm seeing, or the fact that my satiety may be not as strong, I may want to titrate to a 7.5 or a 10 milligram, or even to the maximum dose of 15 milligram. However, accessibility to that is not as readily available in my country as it is probably elsewhere. So, compounding will help to resolve that issue for me. And of course, I always talk about the cost in wanting to compound as well. And also just to see how I would be able to utilize compounding based on the longevity of how I want to look into these treatments. Because remember, I am a type 2 diabetic, and this is not something that is just a fab for me. This is actually my life, and may just become a part of my life for the rest of my life, or however macabre that may sound. But the truth is what it is. So today, I will be looking at to compound or not to compound. What are the essentially what you should know about both of the versions of the drug, and how you can go about making a decision either which way. So you are helping me to make a decision, guys, and I hope I'm helping you to make a decision. Let me put the disclaimer out there. I am not a medical practitioner. Everything that I say on my vlog, on my channels, on my episodes are for information and entertainment purposes. I'm just sharing within the space some of what has happened to me personally on my GLP-1 journey. So GLP medications, as you are aware, they're everywhere, ranging from Ozempic that came out as a semaglutide, to Mounjaro, which is now tirzepatide, which means they are, one is actually just a one receptor agonist, and the other is a dual receptor agonist, meaning that they're tackling two hormones in the tirzepatide and one hormone in the semaglutide. Now, when you look at the evolution of the drug and how it's being currently sold, there are lots of questions surrounding, whether or not the compounded versions are safe, legal, or even effective. And what I wanted to do today is particularly break down the difference between a branded version and the compounded version of the GLP-1 medications. What you need to know before you actually start injecting either of these versions of the medication. So for starters, what exactly are the branded versus compounded medications? So let me just get it out of the way. Branded medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and Zepbound are made by pharmaceutical companies such as Nova Nordics and Eli Lilly. And in all of these brands, the FDA has approved them, meaning for every batch, there has to meet strict quality and purity and safety standards. And all of these brands have met these standards as the non compounded versions, right? The compounded versions of the medication, however, they are custom made versions prepared by compounding pharmacies and was done at the time when the branded versions, as I've just mentioned, the four, were on a shortage and patients needed patient care in these particular forms of the drug. Now, the shortage pretty much in theory, it basically filled the gap that was there where tirzepatide was on shortage and it pretty much ended what the FDA indicated was necessary at the time to assist the shortage. So the FDA basically indicated that the mass production of the compounded versions after the shortage was addressed by these um, pharmacies, the Eli Lilly's and the Nova Nordics, that the compounded versions were now unlawful. And what was happening was that within the space, a lot of lawsuits were coming out, particularly so from, the major branded version distributors versus some of the compounding pharmacies, just to um, question the security, the safety, the purity, and the quality standard that was in these compounded versions. Pretty much because on the compounded versions, a lot of what was taking place was that, and as the name suggests, it's pretty self explanatory. These um pharmacies, these telehealth pharmacies, were actually compounding the original ingredient, which is trizepatide, with other additives, for want of a better word. So what was happening was that you found that telehealth pharmacies such as Mochi, who I'm now getting my compounded versions from, started to add things to the trizepatide, such as niacinamide, which is vitamin B3. In some instances, they were adding B6 and glycine, and they were altering the dosage without clinical justification. And this was just, as I would have mentioned, to secure some form of um, issue with the intellectual property and patent rights that the major players had when it surrounded these particular versions of the drug. Now, you may ask, okay, why was there such a controversy surrounding these compounded versions? Because if they were initially done to address a shortage in the space, and these compounded versions did address the shortage at the time, it would have almost seemed as if they were being, I'm going to use the word loosely, used to satisfy a gap. And when that gap was now being able to be filled, then they started to, see the backlashes and they started to see other ramifications of what compounding would really mean. So the question and controversy that is now sitting amongst the community and amongst a lot of us within the space is pretty much why are people turning to compounded versions of the drug, GLP-1 drug. Well, to be honest, as I would have mentioned, straight out the gate, straight out the bat, being very honest and transparent, it is a cost. So I've often said on a lot of my vlog, it dear, it dear, it dear. And I'll say that over and over and over again because a lot of these branded versions of the drug, be it Zepbound or Mounjaro, Ozempic or Wegovy, are ranging between 850 US dollars per vial or per shot to 15 or $2,000 depending on where you are obtaining your drug from and which jurisdiction, which country, right? So the honest thing for a lot of us that are in the community that are now considering and contemplating compounding is ultimately the cost of the drug and the access would have been two of the main reasons. Because as I mentioned, it's ranging between 850 and sometimes $2,000. And this, of course, extraordinaires is absolutely without insurance coverage. So, you're taking this out of pocket. Now, when you look at this issue of pricing and this issue of access compared to the compounded versions, which are in a lot of cases half the price and sometimes even less. If you visit the Mochi website, which I've now gotten my medications from, you would notice that those versions of the drug you're paying $79 for the subscription, and then for your medication you're paying $199 per month. So even if you take a 6 month plan or even a 3 month plan, you potentially are not working out to the cost of 1 month on a Mounjaro or a Zepbound, as I have been doing. So I'm now releasing the price to you. I'm sure by now you must have seen the price somewhere, but ultimately it's a very expensive medication to consume. And if you're consuming it outside of just weight loss and you're consuming it for a lifestyle change or some lifestyle um, tool, then you can just imagine what that will look like, out of pocket. So compounding versions, clearly half the price, sometimes even less than half the cost of the branded versions. But the controversy, as I've mentioned, is about the purity, the safety, and all the quality issues that surrounding it. And in doing that as a controversial issue is also the idea that the drugs themselves are using different active ingredients and are pretty much changing the true formation of the drug, right? So compounding pharmacies, I would have mentioned, they're adding things to the medication that is not allowing the FDA to give it that approval that you would want from your drug for the safety and consumption and effectiveness of human beings who are consuming. So let us just put into perspective what has been the issue when it comes to compound or not to compound. The shortage of the brand of GLP in its authentic and genuine state. Then you look at the need for persons who may want to have a custom dosing or some form of customization to the drug because in its true and authentic form, it may bring on a lot of side effects that they are not able to manage. And what the compounding pharmacies or the telehealth pharmacies have realized is that if they have been able to compound these medications by adding added, added ingredients to assist you, then it may lessen the side effects. So, for example, they have added stuff to it that will address sleep apnea or energy level, which is the B12. They have added niacetamine, which is the B3, which in a lot of cases have addressed issues relating to, your skin, whatever skin conditions you may have, or just overall things that are addressing other hormonal issues that are taking place within the body. So there, on one hand, some people will say the purity issue, the the effectiveness issue, the safety issue, all of that now outweighs. It's a balance of convenience. So you're looking at, am I to look at these things and weigh them in the balance, or am I to consider compounding because something else can be added to this um, ingredients to help with my sleep apnea or my PCOS or something else, some other skin condition or hair condition that you may have. So it's again a matter of weighing the scales in the balance, weighing the balance of convenience and seeing where it lies for you. But a lot of persons do appreciate the custom version of the drug that they're able to tailor for their own specific needs and condition, right? Um, so with all of this is coming, the questions that are surrounding a lot of these have caused many to wonder, where do we now draw the line in terms of risk? How are we assessing the risk when we talk about compound or not to compound? Um, and there are risks involved in the compounding versions. And um, again, like any other thing that you're doing, you cannot divorce it from the potential risk associated with it, even with the branded versions. There are risks that we have to consider. I'm on Mounjaro, and there are risks that I had to consider. I had to consider the contraindicators. I had to consider, the gastrointestinal issues. I had to consider the side effect issues, their risk of losing hair. So there are things that are happening that must be weighed in the balance, as I said, and risk are there for both compound and the branded version. So let us also look at some of the risk associated with the compounded version. So first of all, we're talking about quality control. Now, compounded meds aren't FDA approved, which means that every batch can verify in strength and purity. Now, for the compounded version, not having FDA approval means that there is no um, condition where the batch can be assessed for strength and purity and effectiveness, right? Then there's also the risk of potential contamination, which means that depending on where they are being mixed locally, sometimes in facilities that are without pharmaceutically grade conditions, you may have contaminations happening to your compounded version, and risk that you either have to again weigh in the balance and see. And of course, research helps, guys, because we're in a world that information is at our fingertips. We can find out whether or not our telehealth pharmacies are operating within these pharmaceutically graded conditions and get the news going. Hear what is in the space, what is happening with our telehealth pharmacies. We can find out what is happening with Mochi. We can go, we can research, we can do that to find out how we can mitigate and minimize the risk as best as possible. Then another risk associated with the compounding versions, as I mentioned, there are risks on both sides, is the matter of the unknown dosing, where patients may not know exactly what they are getting, which can lead to side effects being over or under dosing, right? Um, then there's also legal issues that are coming up in terms of the risk, because now that the FDA approval brands are no longer in shortage, then many compounding versions are technically not compliant with federal laws. So you can just imagine what is happening there. Um, Now, the risk really of it not having FDA approval, like the branded versions, um, they do not, the component versions haven't gone through as much clinical trials, again, for safety and efficacy and effectiveness as the branded versions. As you know, even as we speak, the third evolution of the drug, which is retatrutide, is going through clinical trial phase 3, which means that the drug itself is going through a series of trials and tests before it is made for human consumption. And this is what is probably missing and increase the risk on a compounded version, because it's not going through those clinical trials. Now, issue of consistency is also another factor. Again, the purity, the dosage from batch to batch, the sterility, all of that is becoming an issue. Um, Health risks as well, the side effects, not knowing what is being compounded with what and how it will actually affect you in the end. Um, so, that being said, let us talk about what the FDA and the drug makers are saying about all of this compound or not to compound. So both Eli Lilly and Nova Nordics have taken legal action against certain component pharmacies and telehealth companies who are said to be selling the compounded or mislabeled GLP-1s. The FDA has also issued warnings reminding prescribers that compounded GLP-1 should only be used if there is a true shortage of the medication. Now, this is where the controversy comes for me, and this is where the almost I can't believe it comes, because if something is good to be used when there's a shortage, why can't it be used when there's no shortage? And if you are saying as the FDA that you can only use these drugs, or these drugs are only going to be acceptable for human consumption if a true shortage exists or where there's a medical need, who now determines the relativity of that? Who determines what is short? Who determines what is a medical need? Who is the person who is determining the datum line under which you're making these decisions? So to say to the public that these branded versions are of extreme risk when there is no shortage, right? And that is the conundrum and the controversy for me. So, how Should you use the compounded version if you are considering compounding, as I am, um, or it just what it is that you want to learn about compounding and how to treat this whole thing about compounding is if you're considering compounding GLP-1 as the branded version, bear in mind and know that there are risks on both ends. Now, the degree of risk will be left up to each individual and their own case by case basis. But before you go into a compounded version, do your research. Do your research on who your telehealth pharmacy is. Listen to what is happening in the space. Social media is there to help you. The community is there to help you, to give you guidance on what is happening with these pharmaceutical conditions that these drugs are being mixed in. Have a talk with your doctor. Verify whether or not there is any real issue where shortage is concerned, and be guided by what the FDA has said. Albeit I have an issue with it, but that is my personal opinion and my personal feelings about the consideration or the contemplation of utilizing or semi-approving the drug in periods of shortage. Look at the pharmacy, the telehealth pharmacy's license for compounding from the exact active ingredients, right? And understand what is being compounded to the active ingredients in the alternatives, right? Okay, and just pretty much just do your due diligence, because at the end of the day, to compound or not to compound is completely within your right as a patient, as a person who probably needs the drug and is not able to do so at its current cost, at its current accessibility, and all of that. As I said, in my case, it's cost, but it's also accessing the dosage that I now need in order to take me to the next level. Because at some point in time, a 5 milligram based on the clinical trials will potentially no longer work within my system. If it works, then I will keep maintaining my 5 milligram. But there is a possibility that I may be on a 5 milligram and my satiety is not um, as strong, and I may need to up a dose. Now, if I don't have access to a 7.5, then I will have to compound, because my country, where I'm currently getting my medications from, I don't have that dosage available to me. So everybody has to assess their own individual circumstance. Your circumstance may not be mine, my circumstance may not be yours, but you need to, at the very least, understand the risk, the pros and cons of both versions of the drug. And pretty much for me, I will leave this with you um, on the matter of the compound or not to compound. For most of us with our health conditions, being a diabetic or a person who is obese, the risk is worth it. Sadly enough, for those of you who will think so, the risk is worth it. However, we are mindful of what the FDA approvals are, and we are operating within the space of having the conversation with our qualified medical prescriber or provider or doctor. Always do your homework, like everything else that you are hearing something about. Do your homework before you take in on or claiming to take on a GLP-1 alternative. And as always, guys, get onto your um, social media spaces, see what other persons are talking about when it comes to these versions of the drug before you make a decision. And for me, I have done my research. I did about I well, I've done 9 weeks of my branded version Mounjaro, and I'll be continuing another maybe 1 or 2 week on Mounjaro before I shuttle over to my compounded version. So that was for me a 9 week, 9, 10, 11 week to be of me doing my research, listening to what other people have to say, formulating my own opinions based on intelligence gathering and understanding what will work for me, as I would want you to do for yourself. So, as always, my extraordinaires, if you found this to be helpful, hit the like, subscribe, share this video Because when it comes to your health, information is your best medicine. Thank you guys for joining it. Another update in my Mounjaro journey. See you next time, where we'll talk about what's happening in the space with our Eli Lillies and our Nova Nordics, and what's happening this week in terms of the news and what's happening with them. Profits, losses, new drug, injections, orals, all of it. So thank you again and see you next time.